let me go ahead and jump into housekeeping. We've got a great guest with us here today, and I don't want to waste any time with her. So let me share my screen. And Nick, if you could confirm once you see it's running, that would be great.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. You got the presentation?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you much. Okay, students. So here's the deal. Real short housekeeping menu today. All I wanted to give you a heads up on is that the journal entries are going to be due on Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. So if you have any questions, anything you need to know on those, go ahead and throw a thing into the Q&A right now, or you can go ahead and let us know over Canvas and the questions there. But otherwise, that is due on Tuesday. I am going to actually change things up just a second here and stop sharing my screen, go back to our videos, because I want to have an opportunity to look at her incredible bio, because there's way too many things here I would not want to miss including when I talk about who's joining us. So without further ado, Sara Spangelo is here to join. She's the co-founder and CEO of Swarm Technology. She's developing the world's lowest cost global communications network. And yeah, frankly, she's making headlines, and the company's making headlines left and right. A year ago, Forbes ranked them as the second most innovative company in space technology, only behind SpaceX. Before, though, she was the co-founder and CEO at Swarm, and going through all this crazy startup life, she worked on small satellites and autonomous aircraft at U of M. She was a lead systems engineer at both NASA's JPL and Google X. She was she's a pilot, and she was selected as a finalist candidate in 2017 to be a Canadian astronaut. And I can, without a doubt, say you're the only astronaut I think I've ever talked to in this class. She went to Antarctica last year.
I got cut, but I tried.
Oh, that's okay. You made it far further than 99% of the population. She went to Antarctica last year to install ground-based receivers at McMurdo Research Station. And somehow, some way, U of M lured her to come down from Manitoba to come down and get her PhD in aerospace engineering, where she graduated in 2013. So I will go back to the slide deck so that we can kind of talk through the deck that she's prepared to talk to us about today. And without any other things to be said, Sara, I will let you take it away and advance your slides for you.
Okay, great. Thanks for that intro.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I don't think I've ever talked to this many people at once, so hopefully I don't mess up. So these are the 4 things I'm talking through. Should I introduce this, Eric, or will you?
No, you're good. They already know that. You can go right into try.
Cool. So on the try bullet, you can advance. I think I put, I tried to start a satellite communication constellation, which in retrospect is a really, really hard thing to do. All companies that have tried to do this in the past have gone bankrupt. Those companies are like Iridium and Orbcomm and several others that we've never even heard of. And I think when you start a startup, you have to be a little bit naive and super optimistic and think you have a totally different way of doing things. And I really think that we did have that, but we were pretty naive to a lot of the challenges, particularly on the regulatory front. I can't stress how important that is to a space network, and really how challenging and expensive and how long that takes to do. I also think that we had a lot of insights and ideas of where the launch market was headed, with access to space and secondary rockets or secondary kind of opportunities to go to space, but not a clear view of how that would evolve and many of the challenges and kind of how much slower it was to develop than we maybe anticipated in 2016. And also no company experience. So I'd never started a company other than a party planning business that I had when I was about 12. And I had honestly never really managed before. I'd mentored and advised, but had never had direct reports in a kind of an organization. So obviously a lot of challenges to overcome. we tried, and our concept was based on the back of a PG&E bill, that top right-hand corner photo, and really started as kind of more of a water-based and an air-based kind of sensor and communications concept that eventually evolved into Swarm. So many different directions that we went to eventually decide on Swarm. And then on the bottom here, you can see some of our initial designs kind of on a piece of paper or maybe a whiteboard of how our satellites would stabilize, and then some of the really early mock-ups of how they would look. So you can see these ideas were very, very preliminary. And we tried to do something really crazy, starting from, literally back of a PG&E bill and kind of on a whiteboard. So looking back, I think it's probably was even more ambitious than we realized at the point that we started. But yeah, so that's my try. I don't know if I pause for questions or if I kind of keep going here.
No, you're good. You can keep running through.
Okay, cool. And then my risk, I can go on. I think one of the biggest risks that we took early on in the company, it was started in 2016, is that we launched the world's tiniest two-way communication satellites. And I actually have one here. Can you guys see my video?
Yeah, we should still be able to see that.
Cool. So you can see it's like the size of my head, really tiny. This is literally one of them. And we launched 4 like this in 11 months after raising our seed funding. We had done testing on high altitude balloons, and you can see we really perfected the art of launch on the far right-hand side there. It was actually pretty sketchy, but we flew satellites on high altitude balloons to test them prior to launch. We did a lot of testing in the lab, but we were essentially a team of 4 or 5 people that were building and testing and then flying satellites. And the really risky part of this, of course, is that the whole company basically depends on this first flight. If these first 4 don't work, it's pretty unlikely you're going to be able to raise more capital to continue the company. So I think it was risky, but a required move in order to be successful. All 4 went up on a PSLV rocket, and all 4 worked. We heard from them within a few hours. So obviously we celebrated with champagne, and that was really the kind of foray into Swarm. But I still view this as probably the biggest risk. And then on the fail, sorry for the photo of me from early this morning, but I think every day is filled with failures. And I feel that a lot. I think that you feel the successes, or you feel the failures more than the successes. Every day there's small, medium-sized, and big failures. Something I struggle with, which I'm sure many of you have as well, is imposter syndrome. Like, why am I doing this? Do I have the skill set? Can I actually pull this off? A lot of people are depending on me, from investors to customers to employees. There are always technical challenges. There are always customer challenges. There are always huge hiring challenges, especially when you're an early stage company. There's a lot of investor expectations, employee issues. There was a pandemic last year thrown into the mix of things. So that was additional challenges for a leader and someone that's trying to execute a company with limited runway. Our launches were extremely delayed. And then most of the time I'm just super tired. So that's like pretty hard to like hold it together. So I didn't have a very specific one or one that I was able to share, but I just think I wanted to reinforce that there are probably little failures every day, and that's okay. And that's how we get stronger and build grit and kind of learn and power through.
Perfect.
And then on the do, so what did we do? Despite all of that, this is our amazing team and satellites and constellation. So we have hired an incredible team. I'm so proud and just grateful that we have these people around us that really hold it together. You'll meet Jackson later, and he's been with us since the beginning and an incredible teammate. And there are many others as well. We've raised a total of 35 million over a few different rounds. We've received regulatory approvals to launch and operate our network. We've built and launched 93 satellites. So the top left-hand corner is probably 24 or 36 of our satellites. We actually launched 12 just last Saturday. We launch every month or so. The middle photo is me making a fake satellite. Don't worry, they don't let me build the real satellites. And then in the bottom middle, that's our network right now. And if you go to swarm.space/tracking, the link at the bottom right-hand corner, you can actually see a live view and video of our satellites right now. And you can see we're already covering a huge chunk of the globe. And as we fill in and launch more satellites, we'll have global continuous coverage. And then most excitingly, in the last several months, we've been starting to onboard customers and provide real value to those customers. And I wanted to share a little bit more about what Swarm does. So I'm going to highlight some of our customers. So sorry, I'm going a little off script here. The first one is SweetSense. This is a global development company that monitors pumps and boreholes in Africa. And right now they pay Iridium outrageous fees to use their satellite services, and they're moving very small amounts of data. And with Swarm, they will save about 10x and then be able to install these pumps and boreholes in probably 5x the number of communities. And since they're global development funded, they typically have like $1 or $2 or $5 million. And the cost is super important because it scales directly to the number of devices that they can deploy and therefore the people that can have impact. So this is one we're super passionate about. I work really closely with the CEO, Evan. Yeah, we're really excited to work with them. They're also looking to expand into California and doing a bunch of drought monitoring applications, which is also super important to kind of the local US and specifically California environments because of all of the drought issues recently. The next one is Hivemind. So this is a really cool company we've been working with for about 3 years as well. They have a bunch of agriculture and industrial IoT applications. One that's kind of fun is they monitor beehives, and these sensors are really important because instead of someone having to fly out literally in a helicopter, which is really expensive and risky to monitor a beehive, just to basically see the weight of the hive, they can send back a sensor reading with Swarm for super low cost. And this will allow them to expand their markets, increase their revenue, and just go into new markets. They're looking to expand into other areas like mining, logistics, and several others because of this unique Swarm price point. And then the last one is Eze. This company does industrial IoT monitoring. So this is a box that can monitor things like engine diagnostics, and then will relay information from remote locations with Swarm. And they're all across the world, really, and are looking to scale up their deployments and see a lot of value in Swarm, especially since we have two-way communications. So we can relay messages back to a pump or an engine to change its state. And that's really valuable versus having a person being sent out to do that, which is obviously very expensive and can be dangerous. So yeah, those are the types of applications. And we basically connect devices in super remote locations at really low cost. That's the main value prop. So just some summary remarks. I think it's really important to think about two things. The first is, how do you want to spend your day-to-day? And I know that sounds pretty granular, but that really is what impacts the outcome of our happiness. So are you someone that likes to be on calls all day, engaging with people, or in the lab all day doing research alone, or a mix of those things? Someone that likes flexibility, someone that likes international travel, because I think that really becomes your day-to-day. And if you end up in a job where you hate talking to people all the time, or you hate being alone, that's really going to impact your long-term happiness. And then the second thing is how you want to make an impact on the world. So what are the issues that you're super passionate about? For me, it certainly started in space, more recently in connectivity. And then as I think to the future, more on climate change is where I want to make my big mark. And I view Swarm as a step in that direction, but I also view something potentially after Swarm where I can make that impact. And I think that's really important so that you know you're driving towards something you care about. Because if you're not, a startup is super hard. A career can be very draining and exhausting. And I think it's really important that you're somewhat aligned in what you want to do and have an impact on the world long term. The second note is just that taking risks is scary. So when I left Google X to start Swarm, that was obviously very scary. I was leaving a very secure job with gyms and nice lunches and massages and great friends and a great salary. And sometimes you kind of need something or someone to actually just push you over the edge. For me, it was my co-founder. But I urge you guys to seek out like who is going to be that person or thing that is going to push you into uncomfortable positions where maybe you'll be able to kind of expand your limits and be able to have that impact on the world that you want to have. Another thought lesson that I've used throughout my life and is probably applicable particularly to the scientists and engineers in the audience is that if you view every risk as an experiment, like I'm going to do this experiment and see if I like a startup. I'm going to do this experiment and see if I like to manage. I'm going to do this experiment and see if I like living overseas. I think that's a really good way to frame it because it's something that can always be ended if it's not working out. And through that process, you're very likely to learn something about either yourself, your interests, or the world. And it's slightly less scary to think of it in those terms. And then finally, I want everyone to just take away that there are so many failures on any path to success, and that's totally normal and acceptable. And, you know, like I said before, it just, you know, makes you stronger, gives you more grit. It's kind of like training for a marathon. Every run is painful, but gets you to that end goal. Every day I feel like I've failed in a variety of ways. So totally normal. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have.
That's awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Wonderful. I have really enjoyed being able to kind of read up on Swarm and everything that that has been done over the past few years. I wanted to go ahead and just kind of peel back a little bit more of that story and ask, to your point about the service that you're offering, it seems like there was a very intentional choice made to serve a niche market that was in need of small data sets and not video streaming or alike. How did you come to understand that that market was not served or that there was an opportunity there to start a company to provide that? How did you get there without having a business background or anything that kind of taught you how to seek that out?
Yeah, I mean, I wish that I could say that I, you know, had these great insights and did a bunch of market research and was super thoughtful. I think that it was a little bit more intuition based. My co-founder in particular had a high altitude balloon company before Swarm that was acquired by Apple. And he had stories of trying to connect the balloons wherever they go in the world and bring back just small amounts of data and working directly with Iridium, or actually Iridium resellers, because Iridium doesn't sell direct, and having a really painful experience. And then of course it being prohibitively expensive. So I think we knew that global satellite connectivity was really bad and really expensive. And around the time that we started Swarm, that was like late 2016, there was a lot of interest in connectivity. That's when like you guys started hearing more about Starlink and OneWeb, and Facebook had a solar powered UAV project doing connectivity, Project Loon, and Google X. So there's definitely a lot of like momentum and energy around connectivity. But as far as we could see, everyone was focusing on the higher bandwidth, like super high speeds, direct to people, really expensive, $10 million architectures that would take 5 to 10 years. And we thought many of them would fail. And actually now 3 out of the 4 have failed. The only remaining one is Starlink. Mm-hmm. So we decided to focus more at this lower end. And honestly, when we started, we thought connecting like container ships would be a huge application. And that's like maybe a few use cases, but there are so many more across, like agriculture is a huge one. There's a lot in logistics, some in maritime buoys and stuff like that. And also like energy, environmental monitoring, and a lot in the government side as well. So there's probably like 10x the use cases that we thought when we started. So that part is sheer luck. I will not take credit for that.
Got it. Yeah, it's interesting. When you were talking on a podcast recently and you talked about the idea of connectivity being a human right, the same way that we think about, you know, healthcare, water, what have you. How has Swarm and Swarm's growth and success to date kind of forced the major players who are already in the satellite game to rethink, reshape, reprioritize how they look at problems or populations that might not otherwise provide the income or the capital that they would go after.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the legacy players are not innovating, and they haven't innovated since like the 80s and 90s. So I think they're not going to do well when players like Swarm and Starlink is focusing on high speed. We're focusing on lower speed IoT devices. I think we're going to see a lot of them go away, and you can already see their valuations are going down, especially through COVID. Many of them are pivoting to focus more on cellular solutions and like hardware solutions, as that's an area where they have, you know, a lot of devices and they have a lot of customers that are still interested in that. So yeah, I think they're going to be replaced pretty soon. Yeah.
You know, to that point about kind of your ability to innovate and outpace these legacy players, everything that I seem to read on Swarm and kind of the mission and the pitch that seems to be around the company is around the idea of the low cost point for what you are able to provide. We're having some student questions come in that kind of jive with that notion, where I wanted to ask, I don't expect you to tell us your proprietary information or the patent of how you're able to do things, but how have you been able to distinguish yourself within that market? What has enabled you to do things so much different than everyone else to do it for such a low cost?
Yeah, totally. So it's a few things. I think the most fundamental and obvious thing is the size of our satellites. So I'm sure many Michigan students are familiar with like the 3U satellite form factor that's like the size of a shoebox, and Planet Labs and Spire, two companies that use that for imaging and AIS. And our satellites are a 12th that size. So already an order of magnitude or 10x smaller. And what that means is that, so launch costs scale directly with the mass and volume of the satellites. So if you're able to have a satellite that is 12 times smaller, the launch cost is 12 times less. We also build our satellites in-house. We're fully vertically integrated. So we build our boards, we build the whole satellite, we put the solar panels and batteries on, we do all of the testing in-house. So that also reduces the cost and keeps it so that we can be very agile as we iterate design to design. So that would be the key things, the size of the satellites. So now we're at a price point where we can launch 150 satellites, which is our full network, providing global continuous coverage for way less than what we raised our Series A for. And that like inflection point has never happened before in the history of satellite. That's the key thing. And then also, you know, I think we've done a lot of things really smart in terms of how we do our communication protocols to be very efficient, very low power requirements on the ground. We've also moved very quickly. So 4 years in, we have 93 satellites up. We'll have 150 by the end of this year. Most of the other players have like 2 or 4 satellites that are like not working / they're borrowing. So just in terms of like speed to market, we hear from customers every day, you guys are the only real satellite IoT company, and I want to buy you or switch to you today. So that is becoming more and more apparent every day. And customers are jumping on the network and starting their commercial offerings. And then we're also aiming to sell direct to systems integrators. So those are the people that would integrate our devices into their products, avoiding the painful reseller experience that I was mentioning before. And we found that a lot of customers like that as well. We're accessible. We have tech support. We want to work directly with customers daily. Jackson and I do customer calls daily. We're helping customers get on. There's not like a kind of a disconnect between the reseller and the actual technology.
Got it. And another recent kind of mention to that point about customer interaction and your ability to consistently kind of innovate and keep up those customer relationships. You talked about how you see Swarm as being more Amazon-like, with the ability to have customers who are more hobbyist, more small scale, who are in position to maybe afford your product, but not anyone else's. Frankly, just kind of tell us more about that. I would be fascinated to know, and I'm sure any students who might be interested would want to know too.
Yeah, totally. So along the vein of kind of, you know, reducing prices, making it more accessible, making it more affordable. we don't want to have all of these barriers to buy satellite solutions. So a few things that we're doing is obviously, you can go fill out a form on our website and a salesperson will call you like that day or the next day. And, we can chat with you and get you your solutions. And then we're working on some products that we're going to put on our website soon where people can just buy devices and set them up themselves for opening it up to hobbyists and educational institutions. And we see huge value in that kind of developer environment. It's kind of like a Stripe or a Twilio where people have access to all of these developer tools and they can just build on top of that. Because I think we know that, hey, we don't even know what people are going to build with this, and it's going to be incredible. So let's open it up. Let's make it really accessible. Let's make it really low cost. And then a lot of people will develop very interesting solutions that will help the world generally with their use cases, but also help Swarm because we'll be able to deploy more devices.
Sure. I love that you mentioned Twilio. It was one of the questions I kind of wanted to pose because when I was thinking about it, it struck me that for potentially, it feels like an aim for Swarm is to be Twilio-like and to be the foundational infrastructure that apps and developers and the like would use to be built on.
Totally.
Along that line of thinking, I don't know if you know or not, but Jeff Lawson, the head and founder of Twilio, is another U of M grad. And he is, he's gone through his career and he's expanded Twilio. At least it appears though he's become more and more involved in social concepts and in social awareness and becoming more engaged in some of the societal issues that we're seeing, especially in the Bay Area. To that line of thinking, space debris and space junk is always something that I feel like is the social problem of space, if there is one. And talk to the students a little bit about what you're doing differently to set those industry practices with your satellites that are not being done elsewhere.
Yeah, totally. I mean, space debris is a huge concern. And frankly, low Earth orbit, which is where we launch our satellites, around 500 kilometers. Low Earth orbit is, I think, about 200 kilometers to maybe about 2,000 kilometers. That's our playground, and that's our home. So we care a lot about it, as do many of the other space companies. So we need to treat it with respect. First of all, I think it's important to point out, whenever I approach any risk like this, I go back to the data and the numbers. So what do the models tell us? What is the actual probability of collisions? And how does that change according to the size of the satellites, the altitude of the satellites, how many more satellites will be launched? So we take a very analytical approach, not like a fear-based approach. And I think that happens a lot. Oh my God, space debris, 2 satellites are going to hit and it'll create millions of pieces. And, the whole exponential growth will happen and LEO will be ruined forever. I think that there's a lot of fear around that's not actually based in the math and science. So always use that as a kind of guiding framework. And then for us, what we do is we have 3 different ways that we track our satellites. Tracking is the first element of preventing collisions. So you need to know accurately where all objects are so that you can decide whether or not a maneuver should be done on the satellite such that you can avoid collision. So we have onboard GPS that we send down to the ground several times a pass from every satellite so that we can do very accurate orbit fitting. So we know to about 5 or 10 kilometers where our 5 or 10 meters where our satellites are, which is pretty incredible accuracy, especially for satellites of this size. And then there are 2 groups that track our satellites. One is called Leo Labs. It's another startup in the Bay Area. They probably have some Michigan people there. And they're tracking satellites with radars all around the world. And then the other group is CSPOC, which is part of the government that is also tracking satellites. So we get these alerts when there might be a collision risk. And generally it's they might pass within a few kilometers of one another, which is a pretty low chance of probability. And then we're given the probability of collision. And so far we've only had maybe 1 or 2 close calls through the whole life of Swarm. So almost 3 years of having satellites up and dozens of satellites. And our most recent satellites, we've actually started flying propulsion. And that is really important because that allows you to do a maneuver to get out of the way of any sort of space junk. It could be another satellite that also has propulsion, so you can coordinate that maneuver. Typically, just one person does it, so you don't end up making it worse. And there's a lot of stuff in space that doesn't have any sort of propulsive capabilities. A lot of rocket parts are floating up there that you might want to avoid. So we intend to be very responsible citizens of space, as we like to call it, with this propulsion system, so we can prevent collisions in the future, because it's a very important and serious issue for sure.
For sure, yeah. I would have to imagine that some of the basis of your thinking and some of the basis of kind of what you've used to form Swarm was rooted in some of the time you spent at JPL and at Google X. I was wanting to know kind of what you took away from that, like if you had to boil it down to a couple of lessons learned that you took into Swarm that you think were critical to its success, and what those might be.
Yeah, I think, JPL was an incredible place to start my career. I think that learning kind of the NASA way to do things. I mean, we just saw JPL land this incredible rover on Mars, and with a helicopter that's going to fly in the atmosphere of Mars. Like, this is like out of sci-fi what JPL is able to accomplish, and super reliably. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that stuff lasts like 20, 30 years, because they are just incredible engineers, super rigorous, kind of the NASA approach. So I think it's good to learn the NASA approach and way of doing things. Google X is a little bit more loose, right? So we need to get stuff into people's hands. We need to see how this interacts with the real world. We need to do experiments. We need to see if there's a real market here. So a lot of real world testing. So when I worked on Project Wing, we were like literally flying drones every single day out in a field where it was super safe, just to learn how that interacted with the real world. And Google X tries to move quickly to get products touching customers. You probably could move faster, but they do a pretty good job. And then, I mean, back in academia, I also learned the academic way of doing things, which is to study it extensively, maybe do some experiments, know the limitations of what you're working on, be very rigorous, be very analytical. And my co-founder, Ben, also has a PhD, was a postdoc, worked at NASA, worked at a startup, was a professor, started a startup, and had worked at Apple. So he also had that kind of like academic, industry, big company and small company and government background. And I think that that's pretty powerful to have that kind of palette to take from, because you can decide, like, is this something where we need to be NASA rigorous, or is this something where we can be a little bit more nilly-willy and kind of test stuff out? Is this something where we should be academic? And I think that the fact that we're able to wear those different hats benefits us a lot, because we work with a lot of different groups. We work with the FCC, we work with US government, we work with scrappy startups that are like trying to survive. We work with big enterprise like Ford and Maersk, and you kind of need a slightly different hat depending who you're talking and working with. So I would say that just like that kind of range of experiences has been really helpful as we run Swarm.
That's fascinating. Along that line of thinking about the academic approach that you learned at U of M and kind of what you were able to take away from that to help the work that you're doing now. Not all of the student experience at U of M is created equal, right? Some students have phenomenal experiences, some don't, some have incredibly valuable, some wish they would have gotten more. Looking back in hindsight now, what do you think is the most important thing that students need to know about their time within the university setting, be it undergrad or PhD? And then what do you think more than anything they need to learn, build, acquire, get to know while they're here that's going to be needed in the real world as they enter over the next few years?
Yeah, totally. I think one thing, being in an academic environment, in undergrad and especially in grad school, you're kind of becoming your own person, right? Before you were kind of the student in the classroom that the teacher told things to do and your parents told you what to do. And I think when you're in undergrad and grad school, it's an opportunity to kind of become independent and decide like what's important to me, what classes do I want to take, what programs do I want to be involved with. So just becoming more independent and having kind of individual thought about where you want to go and what you want to do. I think for grad school in particular, picking the right professor is super, super important. And everyone should spend a lot of time figuring out if it's a fit, kind of personality-wise, work-wise, and frankly, just kind of direction-wise. So if you're picking a PhD advisor, I strongly recommend you talk to their previous students to see how the experience was. And unfortunately, as grad students, we have very little power. So I think it was probably the most powerless point in my life that I've ever felt. And I think that it's really important that you pick someone that is going to be an advocate for you and make sure that you have a positive experience. And it's once you decide and you're in the program, it can be very difficult to switch because that can really elongate the time that you'll be in school, your student debt, the challenges that you'll have. So I would definitely do a lot of background checking on that. And then if it's not working, switch early because it's only going to get worse. It's kind of like a bad relationship. So I think that is super important as you look for a master's or PhD advisor, and happy to provide more guidance if people have specific questions about that.
Sure, that's helpful. To that point, if you had to pick one skill, one programming language, one general ability that students would be wise to come out of the university and have in their arsenal as they apply to a swarm or to anywhere else, what do you not see? What are you looking at and you're like, oh man, we always need more people who know blank or who just can XYZ, whatever it might be?
Oh, that's a good question. I had a lot of thoughts going through my mind as you kind of phrased that.
You don't have to boil it down to one. Everything.
I think honestly, the top one for a startup specifically is just like grit. Like, is this someone that is going to jump in with both feet? And, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of missing process, and just kind of like, okay, we're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out. And Jackson is like the most perfect example of this. So you guys should definitely grill him about this in the next session. But just like get shit done. Don't complain. Like, I'm in the mud with all of you. We're going to figure it out. I think it's an attitude thing would be the most important thing. I think also, and I'm probably biased because I'm an engineer and I'm very analytical, but really strong data analysis, analytical skills. So being able to say, you not only like, okay, customers want webhooks. Cool. Of course, customers want webhooks, but 80% of our top priority tier 1 customers require webhooks to move forward in their evaluation process of Swarm. That's a really, really powerful comment, right? And really helps with decision making. So the ability to look at data, to crunch numbers, and to articulate that, articulate the kind of analytical message to management, I think will make you really seem senior and advanced, even in an entry-level job.
Let me dig a little deeper on that question. To your point, being an engineer now, but now also being the CEO, you've got to hire the folks who run HR, who run sales, who run all of these different positions that could be filled by engineers, but equally might be filled by people who have a literal arts background or whatever it might be. What have you noticed within your own self-reflection that you're like, wow, I really had to learn how to appreciate the X of people who aren't engineers, or this aspect, or as I hire them, it's become apparent to me that liberal arts people really need this. And as an engineer, I really should be more appreciative of X or whatever it is. We have a lot of engineering students, and I'm interested to kind of frame their thinking about how they can approach interaction as they go forward.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the things that I'm talking about, it's not like complex, like math in any world. It's like spreadsheet addition, subtraction. So I think those are basic skills that anyone should have and can have. But to answer your question, sometimes I'll talk to someone that is just extremely articulate and really thoughtful ways of presenting their ideas. They do the thing that you're taught in school. Like the first sentence is the thesis, and then the supporting arguments, and then the conclusion. And I am just like such a blabberer, as you've probably noticed in the last hour or whatever. So I think that is a skill that I wish I had. And I think that some people with different backgrounds tend to have a more developed kind of framework of how they present ideas that I admire. Does that answer your question? Is that
Yeah,
where you're at?
totally. No, that's great. There's no right answer to it. And I don't think you're a blabber at all. I think you're spot on. Your articulation. To that line of thinking about you being in a CEO role now and having to adjust from previous roles that you've had and when you were in other parts of your career, the Wall Street Journal in 2019 was talking about how there's only 24% of the aerospace industry employees that are women. Monday's International Women's Day, and outside of building a pipeline within the youth and within K through 12 to help, increase the bulge going down the road, how can men in the industry, the 74% of employees there, how can they help open doors? And to the students who we have here today, male and female, what should they be thinking? How should they enter their careers with the importance of diversity in mind?
Yeah, cool. I appreciate that you're even asking that question. I've generally had a pretty positive experience, a few negative ones along my path. And I think that I've generally been surrounded by really just supportive, encouraging men and women. I think that, we all have these internal biases, and that's like a totally normal human thing. So, they're there. And I think that one thing that might be worth looking at is there are certain things that some men are better at, and maybe like as a whole, and there are certain things that maybe women are also better at as a whole. And I think the key things would be like communication, organization, things like that, kind of stereotypically. And those are attributes that can also benefit companies, and having that kind of diverse skill set. And I'm not saying that women always have those things as strengths. Sometimes men do, and sometimes it's flipped. But kind of as you look at someone and look at their talent potential, not just looking at like how good are they at CAD or like how good are they at math, but what can they bring to our team and contribute to our team that is something we don't already have. And sometimes that's strong communication skills, sometimes that's collaboration skills, sometimes that's the ability to interpret between two engineers that don't seem to be able to talk together well. Sometimes that's a systems view of all of the moving parts and how that can be adjusted for. So I guess my main message is just keeping an open mind, and looking at the strengths that an individual brings to a team. And then also recognizing that hiring your copycat is not going to make your team stronger. You might get stronger at CAD or math or sales or whatever the specific thing is. But it's actually when you have a very diverse group where you're able to see different perspectives, that the team will be strengthened. And there are many studies that show that diverse teams with different perspectives, different backgrounds, different genders and races and all of these things are more effective in the end because they're able to see all these diverse options.
Typically female founders too, more effective and a better investment, as studies would show. To that line of thinking again, as you go forward throughout 21, you've had a flurry of hiring posts lately and your team's expanding because of all the new clients that you're bringing on and the activity and the investment. As you're going through this next year, how do you ensure that your team stays the community, the tight-knit kind of group and culture that you've intentionally built? And then what other anticipated challenges do you look at and try to figure out how you're going to get ahead of as you go through the year?
Yeah, totally. It's definitely a challenge, especially, we've hired, I think 6 or 7 people in COVID times. And there's some people on the team that I've literally never met in person, which is just so bizarre. Our lab back pre-COVID was a tremendous place with just so much energy. Like someone's building satellites, someone's talking to satellites, someone's programming for customers, people are on customer calls. There was just a lot of energy and momentum and excitement in that lab. And I think that as we grow, having more people in that environment is just kind of a natural way to immerse them and immerse them also in kind of our cultural values and our work ethic and all of those things. So it's been really challenging through COVID. I think that, we've tried to have really regular, whether it's lunch and learns, all hands kind of check-ins, and then also promoting a lot of kind of inter-team mingling with people that you might not normally talk to, which often results in interesting collaboration ideas. So one thing we do, which is super simple, we use this like donut app in Slack that connects 2 random people, and then they have a conversation. I find that that's resulted in a lot more kind of mixing and ideas and just like getting to know people that has been really healthy. How do you maintain that as you grow? I wish I had an answer to that. Maybe we need someone with a company that's 50 or 100 people that I could learn from. I think it becomes really difficult. And I think that the kind of like founding team mentality of the early people that are there, that it's their baby, that's really difficult to make the 50th or 100th employee also feel. But I think there are ways to just enable employees to feel ownership over their area, over their, whether it's their satellite design or their protocol or their customers. And we try to really encourage that on our team. And when you have ownership, then part of it does become your baby. And then, that helps with retention as well.
Yeah, absolutely. To that point about retention, we've got 2 minutes left, and I want to take a minute for each question if we can. Retention, of course, is always critical to any startup, especially in the Bay Area. I always want to try to highlight to our students what distinguishes them, how their reputation is automatically different from those who might come out of Stanford, MIT, Berkeley, wherever it might be. From your experience, from being here and then being out in the Bay Area and all, what is it about Michigan graduates and alum that is unique? What is distinguishing?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I do feel like there's a really strong like tribalism with people wearing their like Michigan Go Blue stuff and yelling it at one another across the street. I don't see people yell whatever the MIT equivalent to that is, or Stanford. So I think that it's like a strong pride and kind of like team thing, and tribalism that's maybe like around football, but other things as well. I also think that people from Michigan are like, they're from the Midwest. They're not from California. They're not from, some other communities. And I think that the kind of like, they're more down to earth. They're more real. They've lived through hard or colder climates, a little bit more gritty. I think that's seen. And honestly, we have 3 or 4 or 5 Michigan alum on our team. So we love to hire Michigan people.
There you go. Take notes, students. And then lastly, I want to wrap by asking a question about your career. And if you could moonlight for a week in any other career, what would it be?
That's a great question. Did you steal that from my Q&A?
I cannot remember it from.
I think it would be pretty cool to be an astronaut for a while, but that's more of a like fun, exciting thing. I actually would love to be a surgeon. And that's an area I considered going down, although I'm scared of like blood and needles, so that didn't work out. I just find the human body really fascinating, and the idea of like being able to fix someone by going in and like cutting them open and tying them back together seems super fascinating to me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for making the time. Really appreciate it. Students, have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay warm, everybody, and go blue.